Okay, here we go. Getting slightly less amateur, hopefully, every time we do it. Going for timeline. Part 4. Changing the direction of the screen this time. We're picking up at the end of 1925. Going to go quite fast. You guys can always pause it if you need to. So let's rock and roll. This period of the Locarno honeymoon that we're talking about comes out of these treaties of the major European powers in 1925. It's a period of goodwill in Europe. Germany's still experiencing the golden years. Things are looking up. They're looking pretty good. Perhaps the best way to prove that is you enter 1926, something that affects both sides. Germany gets into the League of Nations. That's fantastic for Germany, shows they're being welcomed back into the international community when in 1919 Lloyd George had talked about Europe being a seething cauldron of hate. And now you've got a situation where the Chancellor of Germany, sorry, the Foreign Minister at the time, Gustav Stresemann, the Nobel Peace Prize. What a turnaround in a short space of time. So you can see Germany being welcomed back into the international community. Also, this is probably a good time to talk about culture. One of my favourite events happens in 1926 in Germany. Always comes up in the tests. Josephine Baker taking her clothes off, dancing on stage. This is one example of the vibrant nightlife, how Berlin becomes the cultural capital of Europe at the time. There's loads more that you guys can know about this that doesn't fit very well on the timeline. You must be able to talk about art, Otto Dix, Big City, George Groves. You must be able to talk about films, Metropolis. You must be able to talk about architecture and design and the Bauhaus movement. Loads to say. Doesn't fit brilliantly on the timeline in terms of years, but make sure you understand that in the 20s it's a vastly more open period. Transvestite balls in Berlin. I know Josh Best would really enjoy that kind of stuff. And you've got a transformation to sort of the old traditional values of Germany. And you can also talk about the reaction from the Nazis. From the Nazis against that backlash, against what they saw as the moral decline of this new period of Weimar culture. That's 26. 927, genuinely, we've got absolutely nothing. It might be that you're going through your notes and you find something for 1927. I haven't got anything. Add it into your timeline if you've got it. So we'll move straight on to 1928. Things still looking up for Germany. This is the year when you can see the fruits of that economic recovery. The loans from the Dawes Plan are starting to bear their fruit, and for the first time since 1914, industrial production is back up to where it was, reaching pre-war levels. It's a massive bonus. There's a coalition established with the Social Democratic Party, that's the SPD, and that coalition is formed of parties who are loyal to the Republic. You haven't had a putsch since 1923. Stability is certainly a much greater feature of the political era of the late 20s than it was of the early 20s. There are going to be in total by 1929, if I stick 29 on there, then I'll say by that period, 1929, I know it's actually by 33, isn't it? Ignore that completely. There are going to be 14 governments. Scrap that, total nonsense. Okay, there's going to be 25 governments in 14 years between 1919 and 1933. But I don't know why I'm talking about that right now. Big error there. We're moving into a German period of loads of elections coming up around this time. Perhaps I'll change colour here. So the Nazis stand under the proportional representation, and they're a fringe party, a minority party. They get a grand total, I hope you'll be able to tell me, of 2.6% of the vote, and that is all in the 1928 elections. That's a tiny 12 seats in the Reichstag. They're a joke. They're not really any kind of threat to the Republic at the time, even though Adolf Hitler very clearly said, we are going to tear down the Weimar Republic. Made no secret about it, so he wanted to get rid of all those parties. On the international scene in 1928, more great news, or it looked like it, ended up being basically just a piece of paper that everyone ignored, but you got an American foreign minister, you got a French foreign minister, Kellogg-Briand, coming together, making the Kellogg-Briand Pact. You got 65 countries outlawing war, saying we want to work together, this is the international goodwill, this is the Locarno honeymoon in practice, and things are looking up and they are looking good for those countries at that time across Europe. Moving into 29 this time, get it right while up. Again, more good news for Germany, more good news for international relations. You've got a recognition in the Young Plan that's created to show that Germany couldn't cope with those reparations payments, so the payments are reduced to 1/3 of their original value, and troops are pulled out of the Rhineland 5 years early. This is Allied troops, they were in there, they were supposed to be in there for 15 years after the treaty was signed to make sure that there was a buffer between Germany and France, but the troops were pulled out. That, again, this works on both sides, shows a period of goodwill of Allied troops pulled out of the Rhineland. Shows Germany being accepted, being trusted much more. And the shoots of the German recovery seem to be bearing loads of fruit. However, he's going to die, Gustav, Germany's best and brightest hope, in October, but not before he warns, as everyone should remember. Let's draw a nice little picture. Straden's favourite quote, that's a volcano. Here's a German in his lederhosen and his funny hat, dancing upon it. He said the German economy was dancing upon a volcano. It was a cosmetic recovery. That economic recovery was built upon American money and American loans that could be withdrawn at any time. So when you got to the key event, perhaps of the entire course, kicked off on October the 24th, they called it Black Thursday. The Wall Street crash. You don't need to know why it happens. Whenever you get a question on that, you must understand the impact of the Wall Street crash. You must understand the international impact. You must understand what it does to countries around the world. It's going to create way bigger problems for the League of Nations. It's going to make some countries look introspectively and try and solve their own problems. Brits, the French particularly, Americans are going to become even more isolationists, but also it's going to have an impact in terms of the rise of extremism. Should be able to talk about what's going on in Japan with the military taking over there. Should be able to talk about impact in Germany. Massive on the future of the Nazis and how it completely transformed the situation at the time. Make sure you know your Wall Street crash. So by the time you get to 1930, you're already starting to feel the effects. Not until 32 is that going to be really apparent across the world. But in 1930, you've got another election where the Nazis jump from a mere 2.6% in 1928 up to 18.3%, over 100 seats. And all of a sudden, the Nazis are on the rise. The Communist Party are making gains at this time as well. KPD, they're rising in popularity. In fact, they're even faster rate than the Nazis because people are getting desperate. And as you all know, desperate times call for desperate measures. That's really about all I've got for 1930, really. I've got one more for you. Over here, great example of the lack of trust that's starting to creep in when you're bursting the bubble of the international goodwill of the 1920s. The French begin their series of fortifications on the border with Germany. You all know it, sure, we should all know it's called the Maginot Line. Nice one from the French. Spent loads of money building a series of fortifications in the same places where they had all the defences for the First World War. The Germans went around the top in the First World War, went around the top in the Second World War as well, for absolutely no benefit for them whatsoever. So we move swiftly into 1931. This is where the depression really starts to bite in Germany. We've got a number of major German banks closing. You could stick that on the other side as well, show international impact. And when banks are closing, people are losing their savings and people can't get money out to buy food, and the depression is deepening in Germany and more people are being laid off. It's creating economic problems in Japan as well, where the price of silk, and well, not the price of silk, but silk exports fall to 1/5 of their value before the depression. One of the reasons why the Japanese are going to look overseas. And they're going to stage an attack, slightly sneakily, on their own railway that they control in the northeastern part of China. And the Mukden incident is going to lead to the invasion of Manchuria. Now you guys could easily get 4 markers and 6 markers and 10 markers on Manchuria. You need to know why the Japanese invaded. As will become apparent as we go through the next couple of years, you need to know how the League reacted, why they reacted the way they did, and why they weren't stronger. And you need to understand the consequences of that Manchurian invasion. It's the largest piece of aggression the League of Nations have faced so far. It's made worse, by the fact that the depression kicks off and prompts these rise of extremisms in certain governments around the world. And it's a complete, total bloody disaster for the League of Nations. That's 31. Into 1932. This is the peak of the depression around the world. The percentage of American workforce unemployed was up to 25% by now. There are 6 million unemployed in Germany. That's the peak. Over 1 in 4 out of work in Germany as well. Make sure you understand the Weimar Republic's reaction. To the Great Depression, and they feared a repeat of hyperinflation. So instead of perhaps trying to ease tensions, they ended up cutting wages for everyone employed by the government. They ended up raising taxes. They ended up cutting benefits to try and cut down what money was being spent, and they ended up hamstringing the poor in Germany who were already struggling. It's a complete disaster. You have people digging up potatoes out of fields they don't own, carrying shoes over their shoulders as they stroll from city to city looking for a job where there really isn't any work to be had. Make sure you know the impact of depression on Germany and the German people. In 32, on the international front, badly timed. They put plans together for one in 1926. Didn't happen until 1932. First disarmament conference. One of the key aims of the League of Nations was to disarm. It's bloody tricky to get anyone to do that. No one wants to be the first country to disarm. Make sure you understand the problems of the disarmament conference. Revolves principally around the relationship between Germany and France, where the French are not prepared to let Germany rearm, and the Germans are not prepared to let the French stay with far greater armaments than they've got, and no one can really make any headway. They do come up with some agreements on manufacturing of chemical weapons, but they can't actually agree to ban them completely. So it's a bit of a sham, really, the first disarmament conference. It's going to carry on into 1933. Also 32 takes a year, but by September, October, you've got the publication of the Lytton Report. Having taken the best part of the year to get round the world to Japan and being obstructed in his report as he was trying to put it together by very uncooperative Japanese people and Japanese officials, Lytton finally concludes that there was no justification for the Japanese invasion of Manchuria and that the Japanese should apologise and withdraw. That's a slap on the wrist for the League of Nations. That's about the bigger punishment that the Japanese get. And the vote in the Assembly is 42 in favour of the report, 1 against. That one was Japan. And the Japanese have stuck 2 fingers up to the League of Nations, and it just doesn't bode well for the League from that point forward. And that's 15 minutes.